First, I just want to say, like, I haven't really done anything except for get the Zooms going, keeping everybody together. That's my role. I'm the glue here. Shout out to Martin. Shout out to Mike. All the code started with Mike's ambition to get DrupalCamp Florida site up and rocking and rolling, and really, it's just just trying to continue, trying to figure out a way to put the code in a way that people can contribute to it. Martin, I'm gonna kind of hand it over to Martin. Martin, do you have some slides that you want to show, or do you want me to try to jump to those slides? Either or.
I've got some slides I can share.
Bam! Look at that. He's ready to go. He's ready to go.
Right on. So let's dive in here. Maybe actually before we get rolling on the slides, for anybody who hasn't seen the Florida Camp Drupal or Florida Drupal Camp website from 2022, this is kind of a quick look at how it's structured. Lots of great features built into that. Again, huge shout out to Mike for really sharing, all of the configuration and the work that went into that. And as you'll see when we get into the event platform, there's a lot that really came out of the work that was done in this one. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the slides here. So really, what are we trying to achieve with the Drupal event platform? It's really around trying to make it really easy to spin up a Drupal website to manage a community event. And we say community event because while we're working on a template that was really built for a Drupal camp, we also, as we went through, wanted to try and make it so that it wasn't specifically for Drupal camps, but maybe this is a template that people could use for, making an unconference or, a variety of different things, not necessarily Drupal related, but making Drupal as a great platform to be able to, promote and manage different kinds of community events. So, really, as we went through, we were trying to think about what's a good way that we can build some kind of a template, a solution that's easy to deploy, but really addresses common needs in a way that, somebody organizing an event doesn't have to have an extensive knowledge of Drupal to be able to easily manage some of these different capabilities. So that being said, let's actually start the demo here. And what we've got here is actually a fresh install of Drupal 9. So, if I go up to add content, you can see we've only got article and basic page. I've installed a couple of other things like, Path Auto, Gin Admin theme, a few other nice to haves, but basically it's a fresh install of Drupal. So let's go into our modules the way, a site builder might. And let's go in here and look for.
Martin, let me just say something too. What you were talking about earlier, as far as the different types of events. I think when, as a camp organizer, conference organizer, or what have you, I think the biggest feature set that what was so exciting when we saw Michael's demo of the Florida campsite is literally the collection of sessions, being able to have a call, collect the sessions, and then add them to a schedule and then communicate with the speakers. To me, that is a huge burden when you're talking about moving sessions around and building the schedule. And I just feel like the simplicity of where Mike started with just kind of keeping it basic was really the big premise. So yeah, you can use this for different events, but really it's, when you think about it, it's for events that are collecting sessions and then adding them to a schedule. I just kind of wanted to make a little bit of a clarification as far as where our motivations were.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And I know we'd had some discussions, I think early on around some conferences are using Sessionize or something like that. Should we try and sort of bake that in as an alternative piece? Where we kind of arrived at here, and you can see based on, identifying all of the different sort of modules and submodules related to this event platform, is really trying to break those out into kind of discrete pieces of functionality so that, if I really feel to Khalif's point, the sessions capability is really sort of core to what we built here. There's this details, which is really around creating this, it's like a config page to sort of in a single place manage all of the event information. But there's also things for managing featured speakers, for sponsors, for job listings, and a variety of other things. So the idea here is that you could, in this case, because we're using Olivero as our front end theme, we can install this. it's going to install basically everything else for us, as well as place blocks into the Olivero theme. So if we go ahead and click to install that, it's going to put that in there. But we could be more selective. Maybe we don't want to use the sessions, so we're going to use Sessionize. We'll do something custom for that, and then we can install the other pieces that are, useful for the approach that we want to take. So try to make it a little modular there, so that people can either do sort of a one-click install and get more or less everything out of the box, or be a little more pick and choose exactly which pieces they want to use. So knowing that that's installing a whole bunch of different modules you saw on the confirmation screen there, I figured I would get that started early. We'll talk a little bit more and then come back to it once it's finished installing. So in the past, sort of Drupal 7 and earlier, people were using this conference organizers distribution. But there was a lot of the common pain points around using a distribution. In fact, some of these are things that Dries talked about in the Dries note this year at DrupalCon, right? So maintaining a distribution is a lot of work, and then it also puts some restrictions oftentimes on the sites that are built off of the distribution in terms of the ability to upgrade. A lot of times they have in sort of baked in assumptions around what modules are available, which ones are enabled, how they're connected together. And so if you sort of go off the script of how the distribution was meant to be made, when you go to upgrade that, then you can have a lot of pain points. And so what we tried to do with this event platform is really build it around, as you've seen, more of a collection of modules that really provide configuration and provide those capabilities in that sort of a modular way. So, as you saw, we did one click to install the Olivero module and let it handle everything, but we could sort of, pick and choose if there were just pieces of it that we wanted to use. And as we've talked about, was really built around that existing work that had gone into the Florida DrupalCamp website. So in terms of content types, if you install kind of the full suite, you'll get sessions that we already talked about, the ability to have sponsors and associate them with job listings, and then have an area for featured speakers on the homepage. In terms of the taxonomies that it's actually going to create out of the box, it actually manages the time slots for sessions as a taxonomy. There's another one for rooms, audiences, and categories, and then also for sponsor levels, so it can sort of prioritize as it displays, having platinum sponsors at the top, gold, silver, bronze, and so on. In terms of the contrib modules, currently it's using sort of this set of contrib modules. So 10 is a few, but again, considering the amount of functionality that we're going to see, I think it's a reasonable trade-off. We're going to talk a little later around some additional ones that we might consider, but I thought this was kind of a good starting point. There's a lot of good capabilities in here. And really, those are all put together to provide, an easy to use UI. So again, trying to make it so it doesn't require a lot of Drupal knowledge to be able to sort of spin up and use. It provides that single centralized form to manage all of your event information. It will, out of the box, provide automatic notifications. So when a session is submitted, accepted, or rejected, it'll automatically send email notifications for all of those. And it also has honeypot integration built in, again, for sort of spam protection, because the other thing that it does out of the box is it will, so the Drupal default now is to have registration set to visitor, but approved by admin, and it'll actually switch that to be visitor registration. And that's why having the honeypot integration is so useful. And as we've already talked about a little bit, try to do a bit of a modular approach so that people have the option to do sort of that one-click install or sort of pick and choose. And we already talked about those. But at this point, we should be able to switch back to our demo, go back over here to the homepage.
Real briefly, do we kind of want to talk about the differences between, I love this word template. I see that this is what a lot of people are talking about right now. Tim, I think there's a channel on that and what you're going to call them. When we were looking at this, we were like, hey, are we going to allow for updates? Well, this is just a template. So Martin, please jump in here if I'm mixing this up. But from my understanding right now, we're not building this so to have constant updates. This is a template to get you started, and then you're off and running. So I think that's the difference. We're going to have some good documentation. We kind of started a Notion page, and then we can kind of migrate that into Drupal.org, kind of showing people how to configure it to the point to where you want to get to. Martin, did I explain that correctly? So this is not going to be a situation like a distribution where, like, you're trying to get all these updates and things like this. This is just kind of like really I guess, template. I think that's the word that we're kind of leaning towards, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the approach is based on what I like to call configuration kits. I've also heard starter kits as another one. There's definitely overlap between, as you say, the sort of, starter templates, or recipes is the other word that I've been hearing a lot in the community. So there's a lot of discussion going on around this right now. That's partly why I've deliberately left the module in kind of like an alpha release right now, because I feel like that gives us the flexibility to be like, oh, you know what? Alpha 8 is going to go in this completely new direction. And that's okay, because sites that used the earlier version, really what the modules do at this point is they import a bunch of config. And so if that config is working for you, you can just, uninstall the modules. You'll still have the configuration in your site and you can keep going and using it. But as Khalima already mentioned, by design, if I do, an Alpha 8 release tomorrow that has a bunch of extra configuration changes, any sites that are already installed in earlier version don't really inherit any of those new changes, right? Because it's basically like that kicking off point, and then at that point it's your site. You customize it and make it do all the things you want. Yeah, I mean, the recipes idea sounds like maybe there will be a way to build in the ability to sort of have the best of both worlds of ease of creation, but then the ability to inherit updates on an ongoing basis. But I think a lot of those discussions are kind of still going on. Any other sort of questions around all of that before we start to get a little bit more hands-on with it? Sounds like we're good. All right, so having installed that module now, when we come back to the home page, we can see some new calls to action. These are really only visible to me as an administrator. But you can see here it says provide event info, and it's also up in the menu bar here. But really what that is our config page, which is essentially, you can almost think of it as like a one-off content type. So you can add fields, you can reference those using tokens wherever you want within the website. So in this case, let's just call this, I know Khalima always likes to use Atlanta DrupalCamp, but I'm going to use
Do it, Ontario. Baby, Ontario, let's go.
Right. Let's see here. Let's say this to be in Toronto. Let's give it a start date of 22/11/18. Maybe we'll say the session cutoff would be a month before. And then we can start to put in some calls to action. So this is going to go into the header. So maybe this is going to be, let's say, node add session.
That's a good one.
Say propose a session. So when you first launch your site, you want people to come and propose this. Let's say Drupal. There's also another CTA. So within the Drupal website, this corresponds to kind of what's in here. In this case, I wasn't sure if people would want a video like they've done in Florida DrupalCamp, or maybe an image. So I deliberately left out any kind of a media choice in there. But again, that's something that we could put back in if people thought it was sort of a common pattern that folks would want to follow. So let's just say we're going to point this to user and say, register today. And now if we save that, we can see we've got propose a session up in the header. It's got our information right at the top of our homepage. So even bake that into a little copyright block down there at the bottom. So that being said, it's also got these CTAs here, so we can, directly within this page, add a featured speaker. So let's say we wanted to add Mike Anello in here.
Please send me this photo. Look at you. You're already prepared. Professional.
Right. Let's see. Shot of Mike Anello. Let's just grab some more Ipsum. Stuff all that in there. And we could throw in, a link to his session or keynote that he's given, or just to a speaker profile. In this case, we'll leave it blank. We can control what badge is going to appear over where he's listed, as well as other things. We could also, if we wanted to, sort of simplify this form. So we could use like form mode control to have like a simplified version of that, especially for sort of this embedded creation capability. But you're going to see now it refreshes, and now that speaker's in there. So we could keep adding more speakers. We could add a sponsor here. So let's say we want to make this Acme Corp. Let's say they're our platinum sponsor. Let's grab a logo for them. Corp logo. Again, we could throw some lorem ipsum in there. We can have a link to their website. And, again, we could simplify the form if we wanted to. But as easy as that, now we've started to add content to the homepage there. Process for proposing a session is kind of the same thing. You're seeing a lot more here as an admin. We could also show you the user experience as more of a speaker. So a lot of these fields would be hidden because you don't want them to go in and sort of, assign their own, time slots and those other kinds of things. So there's field permissions baked in there. There's also integration built in with the registration role module, so that as people register on the site, they're automatically assigned the speaker role, which gives them the capability to go in and create session proposals as well. But the notifications we talked about is really built around the workflow capabilities and email templates. And if I go into configuration workflow, email templates, obviously as a site builder / conference manager or event manager, you'd be able to go in and customize all these templates, but out of the box, they also use tokens in here so that essentially you could use these out of the box without going in and making these, and it would sort of, provide hopefully a reasonable, standard notification that is relatively relevant in the sense of, putting in the, again, using from that config page, the event name, the title of their session, all of those kind of good things. So again, hopefully a lot of things that are, a number of things anyway, that are relatively tricky out of the box to set up. Again, with that sort of one-click install, sites can sort of get started using there. I do also have, let me just switch to a different instance that I have here.
So we also have a Pantheon site that we can post in the Drupal Slack so that everybody can go mess around with it and play with it. It's live right now. You can add a user, passwords admin, and we'll post it all in there. So you can just basically, it's already ready to go. It's blank, so everyone can kind of just log in and play around with it. I think that's always a cool, fun thing. I know you can use, what is that, simplytest.me, but we figured, hey, why don't we give all the organizers an opportunity to play around with a site that's installed on Pantheon. So I'll post that in the post that link in the Drupal.
Yeah, great call out. So here's basically another version of the same site. I've added, some extra content in here. I've cleaned up the menu a little bit to make it display a little nicer in the header. And then if we go into the session list, we can see that there are actually some sessions in there. I just spun this up. And so we can see it's, doing it grouping by the time slot and all those kind of good things. So I think from a demo standpoint, that was most of what we really wanted to show, but we can definitely dive into any other areas that
Martin, can you just jump to the time slots? I think for me, that was the one thing that kind of took me for a loop, but again, we'll have documentation. Like, the first thing that you have to do, obviously, is you have to enter your event details. That's important. And then the second thing would be adding time slots. And they're just basically taxonomy terms. So, which is great, Can you hit add just to kind of see what the form looks like?
So use a smart date here as basically the creation that's using entity auto label. So basically all you have to do is set the I mean, essentially the start to the time slot. So we could say, whatever, 3:15. You can set a standard duration. So if all of your sessions are, in this case, 45 minutes, then you just put the start and it'll automatically put the end. But if they're all 50 minutes or, an hour, you can set that default, and then that makes it super fast to go in and create those. I've been thinking about adding a feature to Smart Date where you could pass in basically through a URL parameter the sort of minimum start date, so that theoretically we could have the links actually basically set a parameter on here. So it's like the minimum based on the value you set in that config page, the dates, so that they would have to fall within there. So again, trying to make it as easy as possible, but I think for now it's hopefully not terrible in terms of you just have to set the date there manually.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So some other additions that we've been thinking about, things that could be baked in. Certainly, it could just be documentation in terms of saying, here's some other things that could potentially add value. So allow only one is kind of a cool module because it allows you to do very custom validation. So we could say there can only be one session that's at the same sort of time and room, right? So you can't have people accidentally scheduling the same, 2 sessions in the same time in the same room, or maybe you can only have one session at a given time with a given speaker, so that you can't accidentally schedule the same, if a speaker has multiple sessions that were accepted, you can't accidentally schedule them both in the same time slot. So allow only one is pretty cool, but have to think about the sort of pros and cons potentially of trying to bake in some of that logic. Form mode control is a nice module for, especially when you're using that settings tray to potentially have like a simpler version of the form that looks better in that settings tray. And then the rest of these are kind of things that I just feel like make for the best admin experience. Path auto, I think a bunch of people have said, basically should be in core anyway. So because the modules have sort of optional path auto settings to, create SEO friendly URLs for things like, sessions and sponsors and all of those things, theoretically, if we just required it, we'd make sure that those settings would always be used. In terms of sort of broadly, some of the things that we'd like to see, this initiative take on, obviously, building out more documentation, I think would be a big win. Multi-year events is I think a key priority. I know the Florida Drupal site uses like static versions of the site. So if there was kind of an automated way to do that, or some kind of a process so that the same site could kind of be used again and again every year without having to rebuild it from scratch, I think that would be an important addition. Are there other roles that we need to have? So right now there's basically that speaker role, and then there's kind of the default administrator role, but maybe there should be like a, session moderator role, or, a sponsor manager role. There could be other ones in there, again, for governing those kind of specific pieces of functionality. I feel like there's the opportunity to have kind of a slick UI for scheduling, once you've got the accepted sessions to be able to put those into sort of the rooms and time slots. But that's definitely more of a nice to have. And then again, we've talked about sort of the starter templates or recipes initiative, and potentially overlap with what we're trying to do and how those are meant to work. Maybe like a 2.0 version of this would really draw more on what's being developed over there. So definitely something to sort of keep an eye on and try and leverage whatever good work is going to be done over there. So if anybody either in this call or watching the recording wants to help, obviously if somebody wants to go in and submit patches that are just going to make it better, then that would be amazing. But even just feedback, so I tried it out, this worked great but could be better, or this is kind of janky and here's why. Any feedback I would say at this point is definitely going to be helpful. If you want to help, jump in and write some documentation. That would be amazing as well. But even just letting us know if you've built a site that's using this, and maybe we could use a screen grab on the project page to sort of have a little bit of a gallery to give people a sense of like, even though it's a common starting point, here's how different sites can look, using this as a starting point. So that was really it in terms of sort of what I prepared to talk about, but happy to open up the floor now if there are questions, comments, any thoughts, really.
Thank you, Martin. You guys did a lot of great work on that. Everybody who worked on it. I have a couple of questions to start with. How do you distinguish keynotes? I didn't see anything in your content type there. Have you thought about keynotes at all as a separate content type or as a flag off of sessions or something like that?
So maybe Mike, how did you guys handle keynotes for Florida DrupalCamp?
So like on our schedule, I think like we call them featured sessions, and we just kind of typed in some text. And then on the home page, when we entered in the keynote speakers, we link with the URL that you can put in there. We link to their session.
Yeah.
That being said, like the way that I see this, and you all can disagree, is like this is like a starting point, and like it would be like if you're a Drupal site builder like you are, Leslie, like it would be fairly trivial to go ahead and add a Boolean, modify your view, you know, like the views are very standard. The sessions or the content types are standard. It's nothing that you haven't seen before.
Yeah,
Right,
Martin,
right.
can you look at the views real quick, just to show? And yeah, I was thinking the same thing too, Mike. It's just like there are so many options. Like, so I'm definitely gonna push hard into making this multi-year because I know my organizing team is gonna need it if I ever step away. So like different recipes, I think hopefully can come out of this, and maybe that would be something that we would put in a recipe or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of things that are across camps. A lot of camps have keynotes, so put that in the basic, not the basic template, so that people don't individually have to go add that. So I guess there could be a way to create issues to say these are things that we could potentially add to the basic template that could then be shared, so that, because the whole purpose of, well, one of the purposes of this is to folks who want to just start up a camp, who don't have the development resources to do it, can just spin this up. And they're not going to go in and create a content type, add a view, do all that stuff. They might not have the knowledge to do that. So there's many things as we can get. We don't want to make it over complex, overly complicated, but we want to give them the basic capabilities. Another thing I was thinking of for global is, has there been any thought to making it multilingual?
No, but not at all. Like,
Okay.
just to kind of like preface, like right now, this is literally a site builder, start point zero. I actually don't think, and maybe we have to talk more about it. I'm not quite sure that the event platform that we're thinking about is going to turn into what you're thinking, Leslie.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm just asking because I know we have a global audience. The event organizers working group is a global initiative. So I just wanted to ask that question because there are.
I don't think it would be much work to make it multilingual more than it would be make a regular site multilingual. I mean, like all of the data is in content. I don't think there's any custom templates in there. Like I think it would just be regular site building, and regular multilingual work to make it multilingual.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's to Mike's point, probably just the same process as making any other website multilingual. So there shouldn't be anything, but definitely if somebody was to try it and say, we tried to make it multilingual and ran into these hurdles, then we could definitely sort of smooth off any rough edges there.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Martin. So like on the Florida DrupalCamp site, one of the things that I did that I considered pretty hacky is the tab navigation between the different days of the camp. So like if you were to go to a session like the Florida DrupalCamp session schedule, you'll see these like really pretty tabs at the top. And the way I did that was like, so go to this schedule, and you see those tabs across the top right there. They look really pretty, but the way that they kind of bind and like get their data and stuff is like a little hacky. Like the way I have it right now is it's literally a menu, like a custom menu, and then I have like the menu attributes module, so I can and I manually put in the dates.
That's a good idea, though. It's simple.
Yeah, but it's kind of hacky. Another hack thing that I did when creating this view, like you have to filter the view by the day, and the way I do that is you literally have to go into the filters of the view and set like the beginning date and the end date. And if you're a site builder, that might be a little difficult, and I wonder, like, we have the beginning and end date stored within config pages, and I wonder if there's some opportunity there to have that automatically work. I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing I was sort of thinking about along those lines, so let me go back to the home and then go over to, I was working in the sessions list actually. So right now it's using a grouping here, but we could do like a grouping by day and then a grouping by time within the day. So they could automatically generate those. And then maybe there could even be like a JavaScript-based tab based on the higher level grouping. It could actually render those out as tabs so that it's sort of like out of the box. It gives you that.
Yeah, that would be good. I like that suggestion, and then something else like I would say is like it would be cool if we provided, hold on one second, Coco, be quiet. Here, Coco, get up here. Come on. It would be cool if we provided like some of the template stuff that I did for these views, because I really like how, like, if you go back to the Florida DrupalCamp site and you see like how I like each session is a details element, and it expands and collapses, and it doesn't even rely on JavaScript to do that. It just kind of works. And then you see how I have like the times to the left, and how they become like position sticky and stuff at the top. Like if you scroll down, like the times will stick to the top and stuff like that. Like I think that's like really, really cool usability. It would be nice to have something similar to this out of the box with some basic styling, and then the people could do some theming. And I would also say like out of the box, like Oliveira's, in my opinion, is not doing a terribly great job like handling this. And like if I were someone wanting to use this, I would say that it does still require some significant theming, whether that's duplicating Oliveira, starting your own thing or something like that. And I wonder if we could help them out with that too. I might be willing to do that.
You can't sub-theme Oliveira yet?
Well, so you can, but we don't officially support it, because as soon as you say you're going to sub-theme, you allow sub-theming, that means that we can't change like the DOM, like the DOM becomes an API because people might base their CSS selectors off of it, and that prevents us from changing stuff. So in Drupal 10, there's going to be this thing called the theme generator, and you'll be able to run like a command in Drush or PHP that'll say like generate theme from Oliveira, call it Kaleem, and and then it'll just move everything. But that's not all done yet.
Okay, so right now it's always going to be a copy theme and rename type thing.
Right now it is, yeah, and that's an involved process for Oliveira, because like there's a lot of places where you need to rename that word to something else.
I mean, I can testify. I have personally on my personal site sub-themed Oliveira, and there was definitely one update that broke a bunch of my CSS selectors. So it's like, well, that's on me though, because that's the path I chose. So
yeah. I was gonna say like we also made some changes in 9.4 that's gonna come out, that I wonder if that CTA in your top right navigation is gonna work properly. What does that look like if you go into mobile? I'm just curious. Does that submit session go into the menu? Depends on. It looks like it does. Yeah. So like expand the menu. Oh, yeah,
actually,
looks good.
I've got
It's in there. You just got.
Actually, let me do this.
Hey guys, we've got a few other things
Okay.
for
Yeah.
the meeting today. So I was wondering if you guys could wrap it up and also let folks know where they can get more information and questions answered.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to just say quickly about what Mike was talking about with the styling. In other sort of config kits, what I've done is tried to use that like Olivero module that is really meant specifically for use with Olivero as the place to throw a lot of styling code. And to me, the idea is it's sort of like a proof of concept of like, here's how you can style it. And then if somebody wants to use their, use it with a custom theme, they probably wouldn't be using that module, but they could go in there to see, here's the CSS that's going to do the sticky headers or all that other stuff, right? So they could basically take that CSS, copy it out of that Olivero submodule, and then put that into their custom theme. So that's potentially a path forward if we wanted to provide styling in a way that people can either use directly or, if they're using a custom theme, copy that into their theme. But anybody else, any final thoughts from anybody else at this point?
Yes, please check out Event Platform. I think that's the name. It's event_platform on Drupal.org. Download it, add it to your Drupal sites. We need to get as many people using this thing. Like that's the challenge. Is we need more people to try it. So please go there, try it, play with it, add stuff, create issues. We just need some more people to use it. And again, I added the link in the Drupal Slack if you want to check out the Pantheon version. We have a site up on Pantheon, and if you destroy it, it's cool. We have the database in there that you can just restore from database on a clean install. So thank you all very, very much. Spread the word, show the love.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop